Asterisk, the forgotten warning the meditation chamber of the Zephyrian Academy, fell silent as Commander Nexus entered, his crystalline form catching the light from the twin suns of Zephyr Prime. The young cadets, representing 17 different species from across the galaxy, straightened in their seats. Today's lesson was different from the usual tactical formations and diplomatic protocols. Today, they would learn about the Silent Accord. Commander Nexus had lived through 4 centuries of galactic politics, his translucent blue skin bearing the scars of countless conflicts. But there was one war that haunted him more than any other. A war that wasn't supposed to be called a war at all, because wars implied that both sides fought. What happened 37 cycles ago was something else entirely. Cadets, his voice resonated through the chamber, carrying the weight of memory. Today you will learn why every species in this galaxy follows one unspoken rule. You will understand why diplomatic protocols exist, and you will discover why we never, ever make humans angry. A young Thraxian cadet, her insectoid features curious and eager, raised her clawed hand. Commander, but humans seem so peaceful. They smile at everyone, they bring gifts to diplomatic meetings, they even apologize when they bump into you in the corridors. The commander's expression darkened, a ripple of concern passing through his crystalline form. Yes, Cadet Zyra. That is exactly why you must listen carefully. The most dangerous predators in the galaxy are not the ones who show their teeth. They are the ones who smile while calculating exactly how to remove you from existence. The chamber grew colder as Nexus began the tale that every military academy in the galaxy taught, but few dared to discuss openly. It was the story of the Cronin Empire, a name that still made elder species shudder in remembrance that 37 cycles ago, the galaxy was ruled by fear. The Cronin Empire stretched across 23 star systems, their massive dreadnoughts casting shadows over conquered worlds. The Cronins themselves were impressive beings, standing 3 meters tall, with armored exoskeletons that could deflect energy weapons. Their warrior culture had dominated the galaxy for over 2 centuries, and they believed themselves to be the ultimate expression of evolutionary perfection. The Cronins had a simple philosophy. Strength was the only currency that mattered in the universe. They conquered species after species, enslaving some, exterminating others, always expanding their empire through brutal military might. Their War Chancellor Brutax was known throughout the galaxy as the World Breaker, having personally overseen the destruction of 47 civilizations. Then humanity stumbled onto the galactic stage. The first human delegation arrived at the Galactic Council in ships that looked like they had been assembled from spare parts. Their representative, a middle-aged woman named Ambassador Sarah Chun, wore simple clothing and carried herself with quiet dignity. She spoke of peace, of cooperation, of humanity's desire to learn from their galactic neighbors. The Cronins laughed at War Chancellor Brutax, examined the human delegation with the same interest he might show a particularly colorful insect. Humans were small, soft, with no natural weapons or armor. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, their military almost non-existent. They had exactly 3 colonies beyond their home system, and their combined population barely exceeded 8 billion souls. These creatures, Brutax announced to the Galactic Council, are an insult to the concept of spacefaring civilization. They have no place among true warriors. Ambassador Chin smiled politely and offered humanity's services in trade, science, and medicine. She spoke of human art, literature, and philosophy. She extended invitations for cultural exchange and scientific cooperation. The Cronins saw this as weakness, as the desperate pleading of a species that knew it was outmatched. The first warning came when the Cronins demanded tribute from human colonies. They expected raw materials, technology, and a percentage of the human population for their slave markets. Ambassador Chin respectfully declined, explaining that humanity preferred to build relationships based on mutual benefit rather than domination. The Cronins interpreted this as defiance. The second warning came when Cronin warships began conducting training exercises near human space. These exercises involved targeting practice on civilian vessels and the casual destruction of unmanned human satellites. Ambassador Chin filed formal protests with the Galactic Council, following proper diplomatic channels. The Cronins saw this as cowardice. The third and final warning came when War Chancellor Brutax demanded that humanity submit to Cronin rule or face the consequences. Ambassador Chin requested a formal audience with the Galactic Council to discuss the matter peacefully. She brought charts showing trade routes that could benefit everyone, scientific discoveries that could advance galactic civilization, and artistic works that celebrated the diversity of life in the universe. The Cronins decided to make an example of these presumptuous mammals. The attack on New Geneva Colony was meant to be a demonstration. The Cronins wanted to show the galaxy what happened to species that dared to defy their authority. They chose New Geneva because it was humanity's largest agricultural colony, home to 50,000 civilians who had never held a weapon more dangerous than a farming tool. The Cronin assault fleet arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning local time. The colonists had been preparing for the harvest festival, their fields golden with grain, their children playing in the streets. The first bombardment lasted exactly 17 minutes. The second bombardment lasted another 17 minutes. The third bombardment was purely for the cameras that War Chancellor Brutax made sure that every moment of the colony's destruction was recorded in high definition. He wanted the images to be crystal clear when he broadcast them across the galaxy. The burning buildings, the panicked civilians, the futile attempts at evacuation. He wanted everyone to see what happened when they challenged Cronin's supremacy. The footage was transmitted to every major civilization in the galaxy, but the primary recipient was Earth. The message was simple: submit or watch your remaining colonies burn. The Cronins expected humanity to surrender immediately. After all, what could a species of soft, peaceful mammals do against the might of the Cronin war machine? They had seen human military vessels, converted cargo ships with welded-on weapons, crewed by volunteers who looked like they belonged in libraries rather than battlefields. The galaxy waited for humanity's response. Would they beg for mercy? Would they offer tribute? Would they flee to the outer rim and hope the Cronins forgot about them? For 30 days, humanity said nothing. The silence was not what the Cronins expected. They had anticipated screams, pleas, desperate diplomatic overtures. Instead, they received nothing. No communications, no surrender offers, no attempts at negotiation. Earth's ambassadors recalled from all diplomatic missions. Human trade ships disappeared from commercial routes. Human colonies stopped responding to routine communications. The Cronins assumed this was shock, the stunned reaction of a species that had finally realized its place in the galactic hierarchy. They prepared to occupy the remaining human colonies and claim their new subjects. They had no idea that humanity was not in shock. Humanity was thinking. During those 30 days of silence, something fundamental changed in human space. Not their technology, which remained primitive by galactic standards. Not their numbers, which were still laughably small compared to the great empires. Something deeper shifted, something that predatory species should have recognized, but civilized beings had forgotten. The silence was not surrender. It was preparation. Every human freighter that disappeared from trade routes was not fleeing. It was being converted. Every mining ship that failed to report was not lost. It was being modified. Every civilian vessel that vanished was not destroyed. It was being transformed into something else. The Cronins had made a fatal error in their understanding of human nature. They saw the smiles, the diplomatic courtesy, the peaceful intentions, and assumed these were signs of weakness. They failed to recognize that humans were not naturally peaceful. They had chosen to be peaceful, and they could choose otherwise. On the 31st day, the Cronin deep space sensors detected something unprecedented. A fleet of human vessels was approaching Cronin space. Not warships, but converted civilian craft. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even scientific research ships. 300 vessels in total, moving in perfect formation toward the heart of the Cronin Empire. War Chancellor Brutax examined the sensor readings with amusement. 300 converted civilian ships against the might of the Cronin Imperial fleet? It would be over in minutes. He decided to destroy them, personally to send an even stronger message to the galaxy about the price of defying Kronan authority. The Kronan fleet moved to intercept their massive dreadnoughts, dwarfing the approaching human vessels. Admiral Korax, Brutax's most trusted commander, calculated that the human fleet would be completely destroyed within 10 minutes of engagement. He was wrong about the timing. IT took less than 5 minutes for the humans to change everything. The first sign that something was different came when the human ships didn't slow down as they approached weapons range. Instead, they accelerated. The second sign came when the Kronans realized that the human vessels weren't trying to engage in traditional combat. They were aiming for something else entirely. The third sign came when the first human ship detonated. The converted mining vessel Memorial struck the Kronan flagship at 70% of light speed. The impact energy was equivalent to a small star going supernova. The flagship, along with 3 escort vessels, simply ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. The Kronans finally understood what they were facing. These weren't ships. They were bullets. Each human vessel was a kinetic weapon, crewed by volunteers who had painted the names of New Geneva's dead on their bulkheads. 300 faster-than-light missiles, each one aimed at the heart of the Kronan Empire. War Chancellor Brutax realized, in the final moments of his existence, that humanity had not been weak. They had been restrained, and restraint, once removed, revealed something far more terrifying than any warrior culture. The last transmission from the Kronan fleet was a single word: impossible. But for humanity, it was just the beginning. Commander Nexus paused in his tale, watching the young cadets process what they had heard. Their faces showed the same mixture of fascination and horror that he had seen in every class for 37 years. This, he said quietly, is why we have the Silent Accord. This is why we never make humans angry. Because when they stop smiling, when they stop being diplomatic, when they stop being peaceful. He gestured to the star charts on the wall, where 23 systems were marked with warning beacons. Well, we'll learn what happens next tomorrow. The class filed out in contemplative silence, each cadet carrying the weight of the lesson. In the corridor, they passed a group of human exchange students, laughing and sharing stories about their homeworlds. The cadets watched them with new eyes, seeing not weakness but carefully controlled strength. And somewhere in the depths of space, the automated beacons continued their eternal warning. Navigation hazard. Uncharted space. Proceed with extreme caution. The Kronan Empire had lasted 200 years. It had taken humanity less than a day to erase it from existence. The lesson was simple: never make humans angry. The galaxy had learned it well. The awakening the next morning at the Zephyrian Academy, Commander Nexus found his usual meditation chamber packed beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout the academy about yesterday's lesson, and cadets from advanced classes had joined the younger students. Even some instructors lingered at the back of the room, their expressions grave. Nexus understood their curiosity. The story of the Silent Accord was not just military history. It was a cautionary tale that shaped modern galactic politics. Every species needed to understand what happened when humanity's carefully maintained facade of peaceful diplomacy finally cracked. Yesterday, Nexus began his crystalline voice carrying clearly through the crowded chamber. We learned how the Kronan Empire made the fatal mistake of attacking New Geneva Colony. Today, you will understand why that single act of aggression led to the complete erasure of their civilization. A senior cadet from the Altarian species raised her hand. Commander, the records show that the Kronan military was vastly superior to anything humanity possessed. How could 300 converted civilian ships defeat the most powerful fleet in the galaxy? Nexus's form shimmered with what might have been approval. Excellent question, Cadet Zara. The answer lies in understanding the fundamental difference between how warriors fight and how humans fight. Warriors seek victory. Humans seek absolute resolution. The chamber fell silent as Nexus continued. You see, the Kronans made their calculations based on traditional military doctrine. They assumed that humans would engage in conventional warfare, ship against ship, technology against technology. They failed to understand that humans had already moved beyond the concept of warfare entirely. During those 30 days of silence, something extraordinary had occurred throughout human space. It was not panic, as the Cronins had expected. It was not despair. It was something far more dangerous. It was unity of purpose. The footage from New Geneva had been broadcast to every human colony, every space station, every ship in the fleet. The galaxy expected humanity to fracture under the weight of such horror. Instead, they crystallized a doctor. Elena Vasquez, the chief administrator of the Mars Colonial Authority, later described it as the moment when 8 billion individual humans became a single organism with one shared thought. They killed our children. The transformation began immediately. Every human civilian vessel in space received new orders. Mining ships were recalled from asteroid belts. Cargo haulers abandoned their routes. Passenger liners turned away from their destinations. Scientific research vessels powered down their experiments and headed for designated coordinates. The Cronins, monitoring human communications, initially interpreted this as evidence of a species in full retreat. They were wrong. Captain Maria Santos of the converted mining vessel Retribution later wrote in her personal log, "We were not retreating. We were becoming something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. We were becoming the weapon." The conversion process was unlike anything in galactic military history. Humans did not simply modify their ships, they reimagined them entirely. Mining vessels designed to crack asteroids had their excavation charges replaced with fusion warheads. Cargo haulers had their holds filled with dense metals and their engines modified for maximum acceleration. Passenger liners became flying bombs, their luxury accommodations stripped away to make room for kinetic penetrators. But the most chilling modification was to the life support systems. Every ship was equipped with enough oxygen and food for a one-way journey. The crews understood that they were not going to war. They were going to die for a purpose. The Cronin intelligence services, monitoring human activities, reported these modifications to War Chancellor Brutax. He dismissed them as the desperate flailing of a doomed species. "Let them waste their resources," he declared. "Their primitive weapons cannot penetrate our shields." He was correct about the weapons. He was catastrophically wrong about the delivery system. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Cronin Prime was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 300 vessels in perfect formation, their hulls bearing the names of New Geneva's dead. But these were not warships in any traditional sense. They were kinetic weapons, each one capable of delivering the energy equivalent of a small star. Admiral Corax, commanding the Cronin response fleet, studied the approaching humans with professional interest. His tactical computers calculated optimal engagement ranges, weapons configurations, and projected casualty estimates. The numbers were encouraging. The human fleet would be destroyed with minimal Cronin losses. The first engagement began at long range, with Cronin plasma lances reaching out across space to engage the human vessels. The results were exactly as expected. Human ships began to explode under the devastating firepower of the Cronin fleet. Admiral Corax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the first wave of human vessels disintegrate. Then he noticed something troubling. The human ships were not trying to evade his weapons. They were not returning fire. They were simply continuing their approach, even as they were being destroyed. The second wave of human vessels entered weapons range, and the Cronins concentrated their fire. More human ships exploded, their crude armor no match for Cronin technology. But the survivors kept coming, their engines burning at maximum output. Admiral Corax began to feel the first stirrings of unease. The human fleet was behaving irrationally. They were not following any known tactical doctrine. They were simply advancing regardless of casualties. The third wave of human vessels reached close range, and the Cronins unleashed everything they had. Singularity weapons that could bend space itself, particle beams that could vaporize entire cities, quantum torpedoes that could phase through matter itself. The human ships died by the dozens, but the ones that remained kept accelerating. It was then that Admiral Corax realized what he was facing. These were not ships trying to win a battle. They were bullets aimed at his heart. The first human vessel to break through the Cronin defensive perimeter was the Memorial, a converted deep space mining platform. Her crew of 43 volunteers had welded pictures of New Geneva's victims to every surface of their ship. As she approached ramming speed, Captain Lu Wei opened a channel to the Cronin fleet. "This is for the children," he said simply. The Memorial struck the Cronin flagship at 73% of light speed. The impact was so violent that it created a brief artificial star visible from 3 star systems away. The flagship, along with its escort vessels, was converted into plasma in the space of nanoseconds. But the Memorial was just the beginning. The Remembrance followed 30 seconds later, her hull decorated with the names of every civilian killed at New Geneva. She targeted the Cronin battle cruiser World Breaker, the same vessel that had led the attack on the colony. The impact was so precise that it split the massive ship along its entire length, creating a wound in space itself. The vengeance came next, then the justice, then the retribution. Each human vessel was crewed by volunteers who had painted final messages to their families on the bulkheads. Each ship carried enough kinetic energy to destroy a small moon. Each impact was a statement written in fire and physics. "You should not have killed our children." Admiral Corax tried to retreat, but retreat was impossible. The human vessels matched his fleet speed, their modified engines burning beyond safe parameters. His tactical computers could not calculate a solution because there was no solution. You cannot defeat an enemy that has already accepted death. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 11 minutes. When it was over, the Cronin home fleet, 200 vessels representing the finest military technology in the galaxy, was nothing more than expanding clouds of ionized gas, but the humans were not finished. War Chancellor Brutax, monitoring the battle from his command center on Cronin Prime, watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed. He had never seen anything like it. The humans were not fighting a war, they were performing an execution. "Send a message to the human fleet," he ordered. "Tell them we are prepared to negotiate." The response came from the human vessel New Geneva's tears, transmitted on all frequencies. "You killed our children. There is nothing to negotiate." The remaining human vessels, their numbers reduced to fewer than 50, turned toward Cronin Prime itself. Their intent was clear. They were going to repeat their performance on the planet's surface. Brutax activated the planetary shields, energy barriers that could deflect the power of a dozen stars. He mobilized every defense satellite, every orbital weapon platform, every last resource of the Cronin military. Surely, he thought, the planet's defenses could stop these primitive human vessels. The first human ship to reach the planet was the Children's Lullaby, a converted passenger liner that had once carried families on vacation cruises. Her crew of 67 volunteers had written letters to their own families, messages to be delivered after their deaths. As she approached the planetary shields, her captain opened a final transmission. "We do this so that no other species will ever have to bury their children because of your cruelty." The Children's Lullaby struck the planetary shields at 81% of light speed. The impact overwhelmed the defensive systems instantly, creating a feedback loop that brought down the entire network. The ship's destruction opened a window in the planet's defenses, and the remaining human vessels poured through. What followed was not a bombardment. It was a geological event. 43 human ships struck Cronin Prime in a coordinated attack that lasted less than 2 minutes. The impacts created a chain reaction that liquefied the planet's crust, boiled its oceans, and turned its atmosphere into superheated plasma. 23 billion Cronins, the entire population of their homeworld, died in an instant, but the humans were still not finished. Throughout the Cronin Empire, automated systems began detecting incoming human vessels. Not fleets, but individual ships, each one aimed at a different Cronin colony. The humans had somehow coordinated a simultaneous attack on all 23 Cronin systems. The pattern was always the same. A single human vessel would emerge from hyperspace, accelerate to ramming speed, and strike the most populated area of the target world. The impacts were so precise that they suggested months of careful planning, detailed intelligence gathering, and surgical execution. Colony after colony fell to the human kinetic weapons. Military bases, industrial centers, civilian population centers, all targeted with the same ruthless efficiency. The Cronins tried to evacuate, but where could they go? The humans seemed to know the location of every Cronin settlement, every outpost, every hidden facility. The war, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 18 hours. When it was over, the Cronin Empire, 200 years of conquest and expansion, had been completely erased from existence. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most powerful military force in known space was systematically eliminated by a species that had been considered primitive just days before. The human vessels had not been warships. They had been statements, each one carrying the message, "This is what happens when you kill our children." Commander Nexus paused in his narrative, allowing the weight of the story to settle on his audience. The young cadets sat in absolute silence, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and terror that had gripped the galaxy 37 years ago. "You must understand," Nexus continued, "that the humans accomplished something that military theorists had considered impossible. They had defeated a technologically superior force through pure determination. They had weaponized their own mortality. They had turned their entire civilian population into a weapon of absolute destruction." A young cadet from the Centauri system raised her hand tentatively. "Commander, what happened to the humans after their victory? Did they celebrate? Did they claim the Cronin territories?" Nexus's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been sadness. "That, Cadet Vera, is perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire story. The humans did not celebrate. They did not claim territory. They did not even acknowledge that a war had taken place. The aftermath of the Cronin elimination was unlike anything in galactic history. The humans simply returned to their normal activities as if nothing had happened. They resumed trade negotiations, continued their scientific research, and smiled politely at diplomatic gatherings. When asked about the fate of the Cronin Empire, human representatives expressed regret about the unfortunate incident and offered to help with humanitarian aid for any refugees. They never mentioned the kinetic strikes that converted civilian fleet or the systematic destruction of 23 star systems. That IT was as if humanity had performed the most devastating military action in galactic history and then forgotten about it entirely. But the galaxy had not forgotten, and the galaxy would never forget. The lesson was clear. Humanity was not a peaceful species. They were a species that had chosen to be peaceful, and that choice could be revoked at any time. The Silent Accord was born from that realization. Not a treaty, not a formal agreement, but an understanding that spread throughout the galaxy like a virus. Never make humans angry. Never give them a reason to stop smiling. Never, ever threaten their children. Because when humans stop being diplomatic, they do not wage war. They perform extinctions. Commander Nexus looked out at his students, seeing the understanding dawn in their eyes. Tomorrow he would tell them about the aftermath, about how the galaxy learned to live with the knowledge that the most dangerous species in the universe was also the most helpful. But for now, it was enough that they understood the lesson. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior technology or military might. They had conquered it through the simple demonstration that they were willing to die for their principles, and that was the most terrifying weapon of all. The Silent Accord, the final day of Commander Nexus's lesson, drew the largest audience in the Academy's history. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy had arrived, not just to observe, but to ensure that the lesson was being taught correctly. The Silent Accord was not merely ancient history. It was the foundation upon which modern galactic civilization rested. Ambassador Thane of the Altarian Collective sat in the front row, his scaled features grave. Beside him, Minister Kex of the Vranian Federation clicked her mandibles nervously. Even the normally stoic Ethereal Consortium had sent an observer, their energy-based representative shimmering with barely contained anxiety. They were all here for the same reason, to ensure that the younger generation understood why the galaxy lived in fear of making humans angry. Commander Nexus entered the chamber with the measured pace of someone carrying an enormous burden. Today, he would complete the story that had shaped 3 decades of galactic politics. Today, he would explain how the destruction of the Cronin Empire had created the most powerful unwritten law in the universe. Yesterday, Nexus began, his voice carrying the weight of years. We learned how humanity erased the Cronin Empire from existence in less than 18 hours. Today, we will understand how that single act of violence created the peace we now enjoy. The immediate aftermath of the Cronin elimination had been chaos. 23 star systems suddenly empty, their populations gone, their worlds reduced to irradiated wastelands. The galactic economy, which had been built around Cronin trade routes and military contracts, collapsed overnight. Refugee fleets from dozens of species that had been conquered by the Cronins found themselves with nowhere to go. But the economic disruption was nothing compared to the psychological impact. The Cronins had been the apex predators of the galaxy, the ultimate expression of military evolution. If they could be destroyed so completely, so efficiently, then no species was safe. The first galactic response was predictable: fear. Species that had never cooperated before suddenly found themselves in desperate alliance, not against humanity, but because of their terror of what humanity might do next. The Vranian Federation, the Altarian Collective, and the Centauri Union formed the first non-aggression pact in galactic history within hours of the Cronin elimination. The second response was denial. Military theorists across the galaxy refused to believe that primitive human technology could have achieved such devastating results. They proposed alternative explanations: secret weapons, alien intervention, even the possibility that the Cronins had somehow destroyed themselves. These theories lasted exactly long enough for the first investigative teams to reach the former Cronin territories. Dr. Kellith Vrain, the galaxy's leading expert on kinetic weapons, led the scientific expedition to the ruins of Cronin Prime. Her report, filed with the Galactic Council 3 weeks after the elimination, contained a single sentence that changed everything. The impact patterns are consistent with relativistic projectiles of human manufacture. No other technology in the galaxy could have achieved these results. The denial ended immediately. The third response was the most dangerous: retaliation. Several species, led by the militaristic Saurian hegemony, proposed a preemptive strike against humanity before they could expand their kinetic weapon doctrine to other targets. The logic was simple: if humans could eliminate the Cronins, they could eliminate anyone. General Krex of the Saurian military presented his plan to the Galactic Council with characteristic bluntness. We must destroy them before they destroy us. The humans have demonstrated that they are willing to commit genocide. We cannot allow such a species to exist in our galaxy. The proposal gained surprising support. Even traditionally peaceful species like the Aquatic Collective voted in favor of immediate action against humanity. The resolution passed by a margin of 73 to 27, authorizing the largest military coalition in galactic history. Humanity's response to this threat was characteristic. Ambassador Sarah Chin smiled politely and requested a formal hearing. The hearing took place in the Great Chamber of the Galactic Council, with representatives from every major species in attendance. The atmosphere was tense, with many delegates wearing full military dress and carrying ceremonial weapons. They expected to dictate terms to a defeated enemy. Ambassador Chin arrived alone, carrying only a small datapad and wearing the same simple diplomatic robes she had worn for years. She took her place at the central podium and waited patiently for the chamber to quiet. Honored colleagues, she began, her voice calm and measured, I understand that recent events have caused concern throughout the galaxy. I am here to address those concerns and to ensure that we can move forward together in peace. General Krex stood immediately, his massive form towering over the human ambassador. You speak of peace after committing the most horrific act of genocide in galactic history. Your species has proven that it cannot be trusted with membership in civilized society. Ambassador Chin nodded thoughtfully. I understand your position, General. The loss of life in the recent conflict was tragic. However, I must respectfully disagree with your characterization of events. The chamber erupted in angry voices. How could she deny what everyone had witnessed? How could she claim that the systematic destruction of an entire species was anything other than genocide? Ambassador Chen waited for the noise to subside, then continued with the same polite smile. You see, colleagues, there was no genocide. There was no war. There was simply a response to an act of aggression against human civilians. Minister Kex of the Vranian Federation spoke next, her voice trembling with emotion. Response? You call the elimination of 23 billion sentient beings a response. I call it proportional. Ambassador Chen replied quietly. The Cronins killed 50,000 of our children. We responded by removing the threat to prevent further casualties. No more, no less. The chamber fell silent. The casual way she described the destruction of an entire civilization was more terrifying than any military threat. General Krex tried again. Your species has developed weapons of unprecedented destruction. You cannot expect us to simply ignore this threat. Ambassador Chen consulted her datapad briefly. I'm sorry, General, but I think there may be some confusion. Humanity has not developed any new weapons. We simply used our existing civilian fleet in a creative manner. Creative manner. The General's voice rose to a roar. You turned your entire population into kinetic weapons. Only the volunteers, Ambassador Chen corrected gently, and only as a last resort after diplomatic solutions had been exhausted. The hearing continued for hours, with delegate after delegate demanding explanations, guarantees, and assurances. Ambassador Chen responded to each concern with the same polite patience, never raising her voice, never showing anger, never making threats. But her message was clear. Humanity would defend itself by any means necessary. The turning point came when Ambassador Thane of the Altarian Collective asked the question that everyone was thinking: what would happen if another species posed a similar threat to human civilians? Ambassador Chen's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. We would hope that such a situation would never arise, Ambassador Thane. Humanity prefers peaceful coexistence with all species. But if it did arise, Thane pressed. Then we would respond appropriately, she said simply, just as any species would protect its young. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices carried a different tone. Not anger, but fear. The delegates had finally understood what they were dealing with. Humanity was not threatening anyone. They were simply stating a fact, attack their civilians and face extinction. The vote to authorize military action against humanity was quietly withdrawn. Within days, the first formal treaties began arriving at human embassies throughout the galaxy. Not conquest agreements or submission pacts, but mutual non-aggression treaties. Species after species sought to formalize their peaceful intentions toward humanity, just to be absolutely certain there would be no misunderstandings. The Saurian hegemony, which had been the most vocal advocate for military action, was the first to sign. General Krex himself delivered the treaty to Ambassador Chen, his massive claws trembling as he placed the document on her desk. We want no conflict with your species, he said, simply. Nor we with you, Ambassador Chen replied with her characteristic smile. I'm sure we can be excellent neighbors. The transformation of galactic politics was swift and complete. Species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found themselves cooperating to avoid any possible conflict with humanity. Trade agreements that had been stalled for decades were signed overnight. Territorial disputes that had raged for generations were resolved through peaceful negotiation. The reason was simple. No one wanted to be the next species to make humans angry. Doctor. Vex Corian, the galaxy's leading political scientist, described the phenomenon in his landmark study, The Hegemony of Politeness. Humanity achieved what no military force in galactic history had managed. They created universal peace through the simple demonstration that they were willing to enforce it absolutely. But the most remarkable aspect of the new order was humanity's behavior. They did not gloat about their victory. They did not demand tribute or territory. They simply continued their normal diplomatic activities as if nothing had changed. Human ambassadors still smiled at everyone. Human traders still offered fair prices. Human scientists still shared their research freely. The only difference was that everyone else treated them with a careful, respectful courtesy that bordered on reverence. The silent accord was never written down, never formally agreed upon, never officially acknowledged. It simply existed, a shared understanding that permeated every aspect of galactic society. Never threaten human civilians. Never attack human colonies. Never give humanity a reason to stop being diplomatic, because when humans stopped being diplomatic, species stopped existing. Commander Nexus paused in his narrative, watching the faces of his audience. The young cadets showed the proper mixture of awe and terror, but it was the older observers who concerned him. He could see them calculating, wondering if their own species had ever come close to crossing the invisible line that separated cooperation from extinction. The most important lesson, Nexus continued, is not about humanity's capacity for violence. It is about their capacity for restraint. They could have continued their elimination campaign. They could have conquered the galaxy, ruling through fear and terror. Instead, they chose to return to diplomacy. Cadet Zyra, the young Thraxian who had asked the first question days ago, raised her hand tentatively. Commander, why did they stop? If they had the power to rule the galaxy, why did they choose not to? Nexus's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been approval. Because, Cadet, ruling through fear was never their goal. They simply wanted to be left alone to raise their children in peace. Once that peace was secured, they had no interest in conquest. The years following the Silent Accord had proven this point repeatedly. Humanity expanded slowly and carefully, establishing new colonies only with the explicit permission of neighboring species. They shared their technology freely, contributed to galactic research projects, and mediated disputes between other species. They became, paradoxically, the most trusted and most feared species in the galaxy. Human peacekeepers were requested for every major conflict, not because of their military might, but because their presence guaranteed that all parties would negotiate in good faith. No species wanted to be the one that made the human mediators angry. Human merchants became the most successful traders in the galaxy, not because of economic advantages, but because no one dared to cheat them. The cost of defaulting on a contract with humanity was potentially extinction. Human scientists made breakthrough after breakthrough, their research accelerated by unprecedented cooperation from every other species. Everyone wanted to be helpful to the beings who had weaponized their own mortality, but perhaps the most telling change was in human behavior itself. The generation born after the Silent Accord grew up in a galaxy where their species was universally respected. They smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and approached other species with genuine warmth and curiosity. They had no idea that their pleasant demeanor was the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. Ambassador Chun, now in her 70s, remained humanity's primary representative to the Galactic Council. She had never acknowledged the role she played in reshaping galactic civilization. When asked about the Cronin incident, as historians now called it, she would simply smile and express regret about the loss of life, but every species in the galaxy knew the truth. Behind that polite smile was a will that could reshape the very structure of space-time. Behind those diplomatic pleasantries was a species that would burn the stars themselves to protect their children. The Silent Accord had become more than a political understanding. It had become a fundamental law of nature, as immutable as gravity or thermodynamics. You could no more safely attack human civilians than you could safely stick your hand into a star. Commander Nexus concluded his lesson with the traditional warning that every military academy in the galaxy now taught. Remember, cadets, that humanity is not our enemy. They are our neighbors, our trading partners, our friends. They will share their food with you, laugh at your jokes, risk their lives to save yours. He paused, his crystalline form catching the light from the Academy's twin suns. Just never give them a reason to stop smiling. The chamber remained silent long after the last cadet had filed out. The visiting ambassadors and observers sat in contemplative quiet, each one reflecting on how close their own species might have come to sharing the Cronin's fate. In the corridor outside, a group of human exchange students were organizing a charity drive for displaced refugees from the Outer Rim. They smiled warmly at the passing cadets, offering homemade cookies and asking about their studies. The cadets accepted the treats gratefully, chatting pleasantly with their human classmates about upcoming exams and weekend plans. On the surface, it was a perfectly normal interaction between young beings from different species, but underneath, it was something else entirely. It was a reminder that the most dangerous predators in the galaxy were also the kindest. It was proof that absolute power, when wielded by the right species, could create absolute peace, and it was a daily demonstration of why the Silent Accord would never be broken. Because somewhere in the depths of space, automated beacons continued their eternal warning about the navigation hazards where the Cronin Empire once stood. 23 star systems reduced to cosmic debris, a monument to what happened when someone made humanity angry. The lesson was simple, universal, and absolute. Never make humans angry. The galaxy had learned it well, and would never forget, in the end, humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had created peace not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that they were willing to do absolutely anything to protect their children. And that was the most human thing of all.